On a chilly night in Los Angeles, a light drizzle fell, painting the streets with a glossy sheen. The soft glow of the gas station lights reflected off the wet pavement, casting a warm, welcoming hue in the midst of the dreariness. To most, it was just another night, ordinary and uneventful. But for one woman, it was a symbol of hope and survival. Keanu Reeves, the well-known actor recognized for his humility off-screen, had just pulled in to refuel his motorcycle. As he dismounted, adjusting his black leather jacket and removing his helmet, the calm atmosphere of the station caught his attention. The faint sound of rain pattering against the pavement was interrupted only by the soft hum of the gas pump. Everything seemed perfectly normal, until something unexpected stopped him in his tracks. Near the pumps, a young pregnant woman, Emily, moved swiftly between tasks. She was on her feet, carrying heavy boxes and helping customers with oil checks and windshield cleaning, all while trying to keep up with the pace. Her thin jacket and worn work uniform were no match for the biting cold, but she couldn't afford to pause. Tonight's paycheck was critical, necessary to cover another month's rent. Sitting on a plastic chair beneath the station's awning, her 8-year-old daughter, Sophia, was carefully sketching in an old activity book, her small fingers tightly gripping a red pencil. A blue and yellow pencil rested nearby, her only other colors. Despite their humble tools, Sophia's drawings were filled with purpose. She drew with intent, as if each line carried a dream. Keanu, now at the pump, observed the scene, his attention drawn to Emily's steady movements. He watched as she cleaned the windshield of a car, her smile polite but worn from exhaustion. Then, his gaze shifted to Sophia. The child, deeply immersed in her artwork, seemed to be crafting something important, something that meant more than just a picture on paper. Keanu felt a flicker of curiosity and, instinctively, walked over to the little girl. He peered at her drawing, noticing the intricate details: a kitchen, steaming pots and pans, a table in the center, and a counter with a blank sign above it. Something about the unfinished space caught his eye, and he leaned closer to understand. "Do you like to draw?" Keanu asked softly, his voice gentle. Sophia looked up, surprised by his presence, but nodded shyly. "I draw places," she said quietly. "Places I want to go." Keanu's gaze lingered on the drawing. "What about this place?" he asked, curious about the unfinished part. Sophia hesitated, her small hand gripping the red pencil tightly as she considered how to explain. Before she could respond, Emily appeared, wiping her hands on her apron, a gentle reminder that it was time to focus on the job at hand. "Sophia, don't bother the gentleman," she said with a smile, though it was clear she was exhausted. Keanu smiled warmly, shaking his head. "She's not bothering me," he said. "I was just learning about her drawings and the places she wants to see." Emily gave him a look that mixed curiosity with caution, but before she could say more, a car honked at another pump, calling her attention back to her work. Keanu watched silently as Emily continued her tasks, her movements slower now, the weight of her pregnancy becoming more apparent with each step. As Emily finished cleaning the last windshield, she paused for a moment, her body aching. The pressure from her growing belly made each movement feel heavier than the last, and as she rested against one of the pumps, she closed her eyes, trying to steady herself. It wasn't just the physical pain that weighed on her, it was the emotional burden of managing everything on her own. Keanu observed her from a distance, his gaze softening as he saw the struggle hidden behind her composed exterior. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the weariness that no amount of fake smiles could hide. She was doing it all for Sophia, and yet, despite her best efforts, it seemed as though the weight of her responsibilities was too much to carry alone. Sophia, sitting nearby, noticed her mother's discomfort. "Are you okay, Mama?" she asked, her voice soft with concern. Emily, her smile forced, replied, "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a little back pain. It's normal with the pregnancy." Keanu, having witnessed this quiet exchange, stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said gently, not wanting to startle her. "You seem tired. Do you need help with something?" Emily looked at him, surprised by his offer, but her immediate instinct was to refuse. "Thank you, but I'm fine. Just a little pain in my back. It's part of being pregnant." Keanu smiled, though his expression was tinged with empathy. "Normal shouldn't mean constant," he said, his voice calm but firm. Emily lowered her gaze, clearly not expecting such understanding. "It's just part of life," she replied, the exhaustion in her voice evident. Keanu remained quiet for a moment, sensing that there was more to her story than she was letting on. "Do you do this every night?" he asked softly. Emily nodded, her gaze distant. "2 nights a week here, and in the mornings, I clean offices. It's what pays the rent and keeps Sophia in school." Keanu, sensing the depth of her struggles, nodded slowly. "When do you rest?" he asked, his voice laced with genuine concern. Emily let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "Rest?" she repeated. "I don't really have time for that. Bills don't wait, and with the baby coming, I need to work even more. There's no choice." Keanu's heart went out to her, the weight of her words resonating deeply. "It shouldn't have to be this way," he murmured, almost to himself. Emily looked up at him for the first time, her eyes filled with a weariness that seemed to have accumulated over years of unrelenting hardship. "But it is," she said softly. "I made choices that brought me here. I can't complain. Complaining doesn't help." Sophia, still sitting beside her mother, placed her tiny hand over Emily's. "You do everything for me, Mama," she said, her voice filled with love and trust. Emily's face softened as she gazed at her daughter, but a few silent tears welled up in her eyes. "Because you're all that matters, Soph," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "You're the reason I keep going." Keanu stood quietly, watching the exchange between mother and daughter. He could feel the love, the sacrifices, and the weight of every unspoken word. Emily wasn't just carrying the physical burden of her pregnancy or the emotional strain of long hours at work, she was carrying the weight of an entire future for her daughter. A future that, at times, seemed impossible to build. "I wonder if I'm doing enough," Emily whispered, her voice faltering. "If one day, she'll look back and think I fought, but never really lived. That I never gave her something. Something beautiful." Sophia, hearing her mother's doubts, squeezed her hand tighter. "You give me everything, Mama." Emily smiled, though her eyes clouded with something deeper. Something unspoken. Keanu watched this moment unfold, sensing that there was more to Emily's story. He wanted to ask about the father, but he hesitated. Finally, he spoke gently. "What about her father?" he asked, his voice soft. Emily froze for a moment, her expression tightening. Then, with a sigh, she answered, "He left when he found out I was pregnant again. He said he didn't want the responsibility. That it was already hard enough with one child. So, he packed his things and left." Sophia, hearing this, looked at her mother with sadness in her eyes but didn't speak. Emily, feeling the weight of her daughter's gaze, squeezed her hand and offered a small, comforting smile. Keanu felt his heart tighten. "And you?" he asked gently. "What do you do after that?" Emily took a deep breath, straightening her posture. It was a strength that seemed practiced, as if she had told herself to keep going 1,000 times before. "I kept going," she said simply. "Because I didn't have a choice." The sound of a car horn at another pump broke the moment. Emily straightened up, wiping her hands on her apron and returning to her work. "Excuse me, sir," she said with a polite smile. "Duty calls." Keanu watched her walk away, noticing the slight limp in her step. Every movement seemed weighed down by the physical burden of her pregnancy, but her resolve remained unwavering. His gaze shifted back to Sophia, who was still holding her red pencil, but her eyes were fixed on her mother, full of concern and love that no child should have to bear. Keanu crouched beside her, meeting her gaze. "Your mom works a lot, huh?" he said gently. Sophia nodded, her small hand gripping the red pencil so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She said nothing, but the weight of her silence spoke volumes. Keanu stayed with her for a moment, his heart full of empathy for this little girl and her mother. The night, once ordinary, had become something entirely different, a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and the power of small, unexpected gestures of kindness. The drizzle that had been falling all night continued, each droplet seeming to weigh down the cold, early morning air. Emily adjusted her jacket over her shoulders, the fabric doing little to shield her from the biting chill. She could feel the weight of the night's work still lingering in her tired body. The fatigue that had settled deep into her bones made it harder to focus, but she fought through it, as she always did. Beside her, Sophia sat on a worn plastic chair, her small fingers wrapped tightly around a red pencil as she worked on her latest drawing. Every so often, the little girl would glance up at her mother, her gaze lingering for a moment longer than usual, as if she sensed the exhaustion radiating from Emily. The contrast between the child's innocent energy and the mother's visible weariness was hard to ignore. Keanu Reeves, having parked his motorcycle at the pump, stood nearby, his eyes focused on the quiet interaction between mother and daughter. There was something about the scene that tugged at his heart. He couldn't look away from Sophia's wide, bright eyes and Emily's exhausted posture. The difference between the two was stark. One was full of possibility, the other burdened with unspoken challenges. As Emily adjusted her uniform, preparing to attend to a customer, Keanu stepped forward, breaking the silence. "I'd like to ask you something," he said, his voice calm and steady. Emily looked up, startled by his approach but nodded for him to continue. "If you could have one chance," Keanu continued, "just one, to do something different, what would it be?" The question seemed simple, but Emily hesitated. She looked down at the wet ground, her mind racing. There were so many things she could say, but so few things she could actually do. "I don't know," she finally admitted, her voice quiet. "I don't think I can afford to think like that anymore. There's no room for what-ifs when you have bills to pay and children to raise." Keanu nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He could see that she had long since stopped allowing herself the luxury of dreaming. Life had forced her to focus on survival, not on hope. "I imagine you've had to give up a lot because of that," he said gently. "Giving up?" Emily repeated, her lips curling into a small, sad smile. "That's not the right word. It's more like, life just doesn't allow certain things." She paused, searching for the right words. "You can't dream when you're barely making rent." Sophia, still holding her red pencil, looked up from her drawing and gave her mother a soft, encouraging smile. "But you still cook, Mama," she said with a quiet confidence, "and you make the best lasagna in the world." Emily's lips twitched upward at her daughter's words, though there was a touch of sadness in the smile. "Making lasagna at home and running a restaurant are two very different things, sweetheart," she explained gently. Keanu's gaze shifted back to Emily, sensing that there was more she wasn't saying. "But you've wanted a restaurant, haven't you?" he asked, his voice low but full of interest. Emily hesitated, her gaze drifting to the horizon. "Yes," she finally said in a soft voice. "When I was younger, before all of this. Before Marco." Keanu caught the weight of her words when she mentioned Marco, the name of her husband. He could hear the pain that lingered in her voice, a pain that had been buried under years of struggle. "We dreamed of opening a restaurant together," she continued, her eyes distant. "He used to say I had a gift. That my love for food was special. But after Sophia was born, things changed. It got harder." Emily paused, her eyes clouding over. "And when I found out I was pregnant again, he left." Sophia, who had been silently drawing in her lap, reached up to squeeze her mother's hand. She didn't say anything, but her touch was a silent offer of comfort, a way of letting her mother know she wasn't alone in this. Emily's voice faltered, and she swallowed hard before continuing. "He said he couldn't handle another burden. That he didn't want another responsibility. And then he just walked away." Keanu felt a tight knot form in his chest. He looked at Sophia, still engrossed in her drawing, and then back at Emily. The pain she carried was evident in the way she held herself, in the exhaustion that seemed to weigh her down. Yet, through it all, she was still here. Still standing. Still trying to make life work for herself and her daughter. He straightened up, the resolve in his voice clear. "Maybe you feel like you don't have any choices right now," he said softly, "but what if you had help? What if there was a way to change that?" Emily frowned, clearly skeptical. "I appreciate the offer, but I don't need charity," she replied quickly. "I'm fine." "I'm not talking about charity," Keanu said, his voice firm but kind. "I'm talking about an opportunity. Something that could help you dream again." Emily shook her head, her brows furrowing as she processed his words. "Why do you care? I'm nobody important." Keanu's gaze softened, his expression genuine. "Because everyone deserves the chance to dream," he said calmly. "And because you deserve more than just surviving." There was a pause, and then Keanu's tone grew even more resolute. "I'll be back tomorrow," he said, his eyes meeting hers with a quiet intensity. Emily stared at him, unsure of how to respond. She had no idea what to make of his words or his promise. What was he going to do? And why was he so determined to help them? Keanu turned, heading toward his motorcycle. "Because I think you deserve more than this," he said, gesturing subtly to the gas station and the small notebook in Sophia's hands. "See you tomorrow." As he walked away, Emily stood still, speechless. The promise lingered in the air, a question without an answer, but with a faint flicker of hope. The next morning, after finishing her shift at the gas station, Emily was behind the counter, organizing her things when she heard the unmistakable rumble of a motorcycle engine. She knew it wasn't a coincidence. Sophia, who had been drawing beside her, paused and looked up toward the sound, her curiosity piqued. Keanu parked his motorcycle at the same pump as the night before, stepping off with a calm smile. In his hands, he carried 2 large paper bags, his demeanor relaxed yet determined. He approached the counter, his eyes lighting up as he saw Sophia. "Good morning," Keanu greeted cheerfully. Sophia's face broke into a wide grin, her eyes already drawn to the bags in his hands. She was excited, her curiosity clear as she wondered what was inside. Emily watched Keanu warily, still unsure of what to make of his unexpected visit. "You actually came back," she said, a little stunned. "I said I would," Keanu replied simply, placing the bags on the counter. He turned to Sophia. "Good morning, Sophia." "Good morning," Sophia responded, her voice bubbling with excitement. She reached for the bags, eager to see what was inside. Keanu glanced at Emily, noting her hesitation. "Before you say anything," he said gently, "I just want you to see what's in here." He opened the bags, revealing basic groceries, a few new clothes for Sophia, and on top, a pristine box of brand new colored pencils. Sophia gasped in delight, grabbing the box and clutching it to her chest as if it were a treasure. "Pencils!" she exclaimed, her voice filled with pure joy. "Thank you, mister." Emily watched her daughter's reaction, but her gaze lingered on the other items in the bag. She opened her mouth to speak, but Keanu interrupted her gently. "I know what you're thinking," he said. "But this isn't charity. It's just a little push to help you breathe easier." Emily shook her head, trying to hold back her emotions. "I don't know if I can accept this." Keanu placed an envelope on the counter. "This is for rent," he said simply, "just for this month." Then he handed her a slightly crumpled flyer. Emily took it and read the words carefully, "Culinary course for single mothers." She blinked, confused. "What is this?" "It's a free cooking course," Keanu explained. "It covers professional techniques and even helps with the business side of things, in case you ever want to turn this into something bigger." Emily stared at the flyer, then back at Keanu. She was struggling to process everything that had just happened. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know us." Keanu offered a small smile, though his expression remained serious. "Because you deserve it," he said. "And because sometimes, one act of kindness can change everything." Emily took a deep breath, trying to hold back her tears. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything right now," Keanu replied. "Just think about it. And know that someone believes in you." Sophia, still clutching the pencils to her chest, looked up at her mother. "Mama, will you learn new recipes? Like the ones Grandma used to make?" Emily looked at her daughter, then at the flyer in her hand. For a brief moment, something shifted within her. A flicker of hope, however faint, appeared in her eyes. She glanced from Sophia to Keanu, still hesitant but with a newfound spark of possibility. Months had passed since Emily had first set foot in the culinary course Keanu had introduced her to. Back then, her world felt small and weighed down by years of survival, juggling bills, raising a child alone, and trying to hold on to whatever scraps of hope remained. But now, after completing the course, Emily had rediscovered something she thought had long been lost, her passion for food and the life-changing power it had to bring people together. The culinary course had been more than just an education. It had been a journey of transformation for Emily, unlocking doors she had never imagined opening. With each class, she not only refined her cooking skills but also learned how food could be a bridge between cultures, between strangers, and between people's hearts. As she worked diligently, her cooking became more than just a means of sustenance, it became a way of connecting with others in a deeply personal and profound way. During these months, Keanu had quietly kept his promise, working on something bigger, something far beyond what Emily could have anticipated. While she was immersed in the kitchen, learning new techniques and perfecting her recipes, Keanu had been gathering contacts, seeking out support, and searching for the perfect place, a space that would become the realization of her long-forgotten dream. Then, on a crisp morning, Emily and Sophia arrived at an unfamiliar location, uncertain of what awaited them. Keanu stood by the entrance of the building, waiting patiently. The familiar calm smile on his face reassured them, though Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen. As they approached, Emily scanned the storefront, her curiosity piqued. "What is this?" Emily asked, her voice tinged with confusion. Keanu stepped aside, gesturing for her to look up. The sign above the door was elegant, the lettering beautifully crafted. It read, "Asteria Laca Dao." Emily froze in place. Shock washed over her face, and she instinctively brought a hand to her mouth to contain the flood of emotions that threatened to spill out. Tears began to roll down her cheeks, a silent testament to the overwhelming flood of gratitude and disbelief that filled her heart. Sophia, sensing her mother's awe, tugged at Emily's arm, her voice filled with uncontainable excitement. "It's your restaurant, Mama!" she exclaimed, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's really yours." Emily turned to Keanu, her expression one of disbelief. You did this?" she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. "Why?" Keanu smiled softly, though his tone was serious, almost reverent. "Because you deserve it. Because your story, your talent, they are special. The world needs to see them. And because no one should have to give up on their dreams." The words hung in the air as Emily tried to absorb the enormity of what Keanu had done for her and Sophia. He had given her more than just a restaurant, he had given her back her dreams, her purpose, and a chance to finally live the life she had always wanted. Together, they entered the building, and Emily's senses were immediately overwhelmed. The space was simple yet inviting, with all the elements she needed to create a functioning kitchen. Neatly arranged tables lined the room, each set with care and intention. The space was a blank canvas, but it felt warm, familiar, and full of potential. It was the perfect setting for the next chapter in her life. Sophia, with her ever-present colored pencils in hand, eagerly ran to a corner of the room, where a small table had been set up for children to draw. On the table, there were fresh colored pencils, Keanu's gift from months ago, arranged neatly. Sophia, thrilled by the addition to her new office, immediately began sketching, her face lit with joy. Emily stood in the center of the room, her fingers trailing over the surfaces, still trying to fully grasp what was happening. This couldn't be real, could it? Was this truly the culmination of her long-held dream? She turned to Keanu, her heart racing as she struggled to find the right words. I don't know how to thank you for this." Keanu's gaze softened, and his voice became gentle. "You don't have to thank me," he said quietly. "Just do what you do best, cook, bring people together, and pass this kindness forward when you can." The grand opening of Asteria Laca Dao was scheduled just days later, and the excitement in the air was palpable. Emily worked tirelessly to prepare, and when the doors finally opened, The restaurant quickly became a beloved gathering spot for the community. Emily's dishes, each inspired by her grandmother's cherished recipes but with her own unique twist, delighted the patrons and brought them back time and time again. The food was remarkable, yes, but what truly made the restaurant special was the heart that Emily poured into every detail, every bite, every interaction. On the night of the opening, Sophia proudly sat at a table, handing out menus she had designed herself. The bright illustrations on the menus were a reflection of her boundless imagination and love for the place she now called home. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Emily prepared a lasagna that would become the star of the night, a rich, hearty dish infused with the love and traditions of her Italian roots. The restaurant buzzed with laughter, conversation, and the clinking of glasses. Keanu, who had quietly slipped into a corner, sat at a table by himself, his gaze surveying the room. He was content, knowing that he had played a part in making this dream a reality. When Emily brought a fresh batch of lasagna to his table, she sat down across from him for a moment, taking in the energy of the room and the life she had breathed into the space. "I never imagined I'd be here," she said softly, her voice filled with gratitude. Keanu glanced around the room, his smile wide and genuine. "But you deserve to be here," he said, his tone filled with quiet pride. "What you've created here is something everyone needs to experience." Emily looked around the bustling restaurant, the warmth of the space wrapping itself around her like a familiar embrace. She realized, in that moment, that her dream had come back to life. But as much as the transformation had been monumental for her own life, the true impact went far beyond that. The ripple effect of Keanu's simple act of kindness was only just beginning to unfold, and it was touching lives in ways she could never have anticipated. The aroma of freshly prepared meals filled the air, wrapping the small restaurant in a warm embrace. Customers chatted and laughed at the tables, sharing stories over steaming plates of food. The atmosphere was alive, filled with connection and community. It was no longer just a place to eat, it was a space for people to come together, to celebrate life, to share experiences, and to feel welcomed, no matter their background or circumstances. Sophia, always with her colored pencils in hand, moved between the tables, proudly handing out menus that she had drawn herself. She loved talking about the restaurant, excitedly sharing that it was inspired by her grandmother's cherished recipes. Emily watched her daughter's enthusiasm, her heart swelling with pride and love. Keanu sat at his usual table, quiet yet unmistakably present. His eyes followed the activity in the room, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He knew that what he was witnessing went deeper than the bustling room and the success of the restaurant. This was the beginning of something bigger, a movement of kindness, a cycle that would continue for years to come. Emily approached Keanu with a steaming cup of coffee, a playful smile on her face. "You always sit at the same table," she remarked, setting the cup in front of him. Keanu smiled back, his gaze warm. "It's the best spot in the house," he replied. "I can see everything." Emily sat across from him, her eyes sweeping over the restaurant, taking in the life and energy that filled the space. "I never could have imagined this," she said, her voice filled with awe. "Not a day goes by that I don't thank you for what you've done for me and Sophia. You changed everything?" Keanu shook his head gently. "You changed everything," he corrected her. "I just gave you a little push." Emily smiled back at him, but her expression grew more serious. "I'll never forget what you've done for us. And I'll make sure to pay it forward," she promised. Keanu nodded, his eyes reflecting a quiet satisfaction. "That's all I could ever ask. Kindness is a cycle. Now, you have the chance to be that change for someone else." Just then, Sophia appeared at the table, her sketchbook in hand. "Mama, look what I drew," she said, her voice filled with excitement. Emily took the sketchbook from her daughter, her heart swelling with pride. Sophia had drawn a picture of the restaurant, now full of customers and steaming plates of food. The large sign outside was bold and clear, reading Asteria Laca Dao. "It's perfect," Emily said softly, pulling Sophia into a tight hug. "I couldn't have asked for anything more." Keanu stood up, leaving a few bills on the table. "I think it's time for me to go," he said, his voice calm yet filled with finality. Emily looked at him, surprised. Why? You're part of this. Keanu smiled warmly, his eyes sincere. I always will be, he replied. But this place is yours now. It's time for you to keep writing this story. He gave Sophia a warm smile before heading to the door, leaving Emily deeply moved. As she watched him walk away, she realized that her life hadn't just changed, it had transformed. And now, she was ready to be the catalyst for someone else's transformation. What Emily would do next would become the next chapter in her story, a story of courage, determination, and the profound power of kindness. The message of her story was simple yet powerful: never stop dreaming. Dreams are the flame that keeps hope alive, even in the hardest moments. They give us purpose, direction, and something to fight for. And alongside dreams, kindness becomes the thread that connects us, a quiet force that transforms lives by reminding us that no one is ever truly alone. Dreams and kindness have the power to change the world, not in grand, immediate gestures, but one life at a time, one act at a time. So, believe in them. Nurture them. And pass them on. Because that's how we build a more beautiful future for us all. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to explore more stories of hope, compassion, and resilience. Click the screen to keep the warmth alive and discover more.